Welcome, everyone. We're in the home stretch on the Tuesday track of Data Summit Connect 2021. And you are joining to hear Anil Inamdar navigating open source and open core in the data layer. Anil is the VP and head of data solutions of Instacluster. Anil, take it away.
Thank you so much, Chrissy. All right, let me share my screen. All right. So good afternoon, good evening, good morning. I think we have all the time zones. So hope you are enjoying the conference so far. My name is Anil Inamdar, and I'm the VP and Global Head of Data Solutions, as Chrissy mentioned, for Instacluster. The topic of my presentation is navigating open source and open core in the data layer. Now, the open source software has come a long way and now an integral part of every enterprise architecture. But it has also become, I would say, more complex in terms of licensing, governance, and ecosystem. And the presentation today will try to kind of shed some light on that and make it and simplify things for you. Oops. Yeah. Okay, so let me start with a brief history. I won't be spending too much time on this, but just to set some context. Now, open source movement was essentially kicked off by Richard Stallman in 1984 when he founded the Free Software Foundation. It was a revolution against the proprietary software. Then in 1985, the GNU public license was officially announced. Fast forward 10 years. In 1994, Linux 1.0 was released under GPL by Linus Torvalds. In 1998, Netscape released its browser as a free software. The term open source was used for the first time. In 2003, Linux operating system and Apache web server, they became mainstream, and the progress continues. So let's quickly review the progression of the open source ecosystem through years. As we saw from the previous slide, there was a revolution in the 1980s and 1990s in the software development. It was primarily against the closed source community. Individual collaborators worked asynchronously on projects that they were passionate about. The initial licensing model was completely free, with the caveat that there may not be support or an immediate fix to a bug. Linux and MySQL are pretty good examples of that. The next wave started somewhere in 2000. These dates are approximate. I'm calling it expansion. The software in this case was built with commercial customers in mind. It was typically developed in a company in the beginning and was later moved to, say, a foundation. Hadoop was started in Yahoo, Kafka in LinkedIn, Cassandra in Facebook. The core software was free, but several vendors started offering enhancements and could charge licensing fees. The current wave is going after enterprise customers, and cloud is playing a big role. In this wave, the software contributors are primarily from a commercial business. The licensing model is very much like the expansion phase, but the cloud vendors have their own twists. So the popularity of open source has been growing constantly, while the closed source is declining. Now, this chart is only for database technologies, but similar trends have been observed in every domain. So why open source? Why is it becoming so popular, and what does open source bring to the table? So there are many reasons for it. Okay, I have tried to group this in like 6 broad categories. So starting with economies of scale, I think this is kind of a no-brainer. There is no licensing cost, there is no vendor lock-in, there is no technology lock-in. The next is security. So when more and more people start using the software, we find more and more loopholes and we fix them. Okay, so there is safety in numbers, and I like that Linus's law, which says, given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. The third is intellectual property. Now, open source foundations provide flexible licensing. Enterprise benefit from clarity and the transparency. Now, there are lots of caveats here, and one of the goals of this presentation is to kind of shed some light on that, and we will talk about that. So it's not as straightforward as I make it here. Fourth is scalability and reliability. The software is peer reviewed, so it becomes very reliable. Also, adoption by fast multiple organization like Apple or Netflix or Uber, okay, they make it robust and scalable. One supportive community is the next item. Now, one thing that differentiates everything about software, about open source is the community. Okay, so many popular software have a support of thriving, vibrant communities that are working on a software that they love for a common purpose, and they're very passionate about that. Apache software, for example, has over 8,000 committers and maybe hundreds and thousands of contributors, individual contributors and corporations. So community plays a big role in open source. Then last but not the least is innovation. I think this is kind of a, when many people, when they start using open source software, they focus on no licensing, no vendor log and things like that. They forget that innovation is a big thing that open source brings to the table. If you're using a proprietary software and you need a feature in that software, you'll have to approach the software vendor and then we have to wait on their timeline. Here, you can decide on the direction of the product. Okay, meaning many times Apple and Netflix working in Cassandra, okay, they need a feature, okay, they start working on it. Okay, they have that ability to do it because they are not bound, okay, by the laws of the third-party vendor. Okay, they can do that on. There are many times there are unusual use cases that are not supported by the existing proprietary software. In that case, you can start your own thing. So innovation is a big thing that is kind of ignored in while selecting open source technology, but it plays a big role. The Joy's law, Bill Joy's law, which says that no matter who you are, most of the smartest people work for someone else. So why not take advantage of the community and tap into those smart people? So those are some of the advantages that open source software has over other forms of software. All right, so we looked at open source, why it is important. Now, what is open core? Okay, this new term called open core, what is it? So now an open source is a free software. So how can you make money out of it? So a popular business model came into being called the open core. Now, open core is a business model to monetize free open source software. That's it. That's as simple as that. The core of the software, okay, is open, but a vendor can add proprietary features and charge licensing fees for that. And open source is always a project, while open core could be a product. Open core exploited some of the challenges with open source, like most prominently the absence of support or need for additional features like monitoring or backup or restore or auto provisioning, things like that. This model, open core model, has been exploited by vendors like Cloudera, DataStack, Confluent very successfully. But that's not the whole story. And I think one of the reasons for this presentation is to kind of highlight some of the caveats. So I believe that open core is continuously moving towards the proprietary world. Okay, you start with open source software. Okay, and obviously there is a support gap. Okay, you fill that gap. Then there's a feature gap. Okay, you fill that gap. And then obviously you want to find out more differentiating factors, and you say, okay, let me change my delivery model to say software as a service. Okay, which is very popular now with the popularity of cloud software. And ultimately, you end up becoming a proprietary software. So the open core is always marching towards proprietary. They first fill the support gap, then they fill the feature gap, then they fill the delivery model, and ultimately there's no differentiation. But what happens to the open source? Well, open source doesn't stay quiet. Okay, the communities who are passionate about it, or the foundations who really believe in that product, okay, they continuously they play catch up and fill those gaps. Okay, whatever new features that the open core is adding, okay, open source can adopt those features. Okay, they may lag a version behind. Okay, but they always catch up. Same thing with delivery model. Okay, they may not have a cloud delivery model right now, but in the future they will attempt to have that delivery model as well. So so the gist is that open core continues to march towards proprietary, while open source always fills those gaps and always remains open source. So there's something to think about when you choose the software next time for any of your solutions, data solutions, cloud solutions, whatever you think. Okay, think about this. All right, so so some of the considerations. Okay, when we have to decide between open source and open core, some of the considerations, some of the things that you should focus on, and I have identified like five items there: licensing, governance, brand, business models, and ecosystem. So let's take each one by one. So first is licensing. All right. So now, even though we are talking about free open source projects, but somebody still owns the copyright in all the code. Now, exactly who owns the copyright and in what capacity can be very complicated and will depend on project structure, but somebody does own the copyright of the code. Now, license is a mechanism for anybody to use the code. License is how the copyright holder provides permission for other people to use the code they hold copyright in. Now, open source licenses are generally perpetual, but the copyright holder can change the license with the new versions. Okay, now don't get scared by this slide. Now, open source licensing has several nuances and are really complicated. Now, this is from Wikipedia and just meant to show the complexity. You can take a look at this at a leisure. We're going to simplify the spreadsheet for you. Okay, so for all practical purposes, you can focus on this summary. So there are primarily three types of licenses that you should be aware of. First is the permissive license. Now, this allows broad free use and modification with minimal obligation. The challenge is that one can modify and add proprietary features not offered by the open source software and charge money for it separately. Examples of this license is very popular Apache 2.0 used by Cassandra, Kafka, and other projects. The second license is the copyleft license. Now, you might have heard copyright. Okay, so there's a copyleft. This also allows broad free use, but requires any modifications to be made public under the same license. So this is different than the permissive license, where I can make changes and I don't have to publish those changes under the same license. I can have my own proprietary thing going on. Here, I cannot have that. So this is often prohibited by corporate open source policies. Example of this licensing is GPL or Mozilla Public License. The third type of license is a custom license. In this case, the holder can do whatever they want. Now, this type of license is increasingly used by open code companies to protect themselves against AWS or other cloud providers with provisions against deploying as a managed service. Example is SSPL, server-side public license used by MongoDB and Elastic.co. I'm going to consider Elastic.co as an example in the future, in the future slides, and kind of explain how the server-side public license was used by Elastic.co to kind of challenge what AWS was trying to do, but AWS kind of had its own game plan. So it's an interesting use case. I will talk in the end. Okay, so the next item is governance. So now that you have some knowledge of licensing, but how is a project governed? Who has the power to make decisions? Okay. So ultimately, the project or the license owner gets to decide what changes go into the code base. Now, that body could be a foundation. In this case, the foundation provides open governance and decision making. Some examples are Apache Foundation, as we saw already, Apache Web Server, Cassandra, Kafka, Lucene. And there is another foundation, very popular, called Cloud Native Computing Foundation, CNCF, which governs Kubernetes, Vitis, other softwares. Apart from foundation, the owner could also be a corporation. In this case, the corporation unilaterally is the decision maker. Okay, and they can accept or reject whatever changes they want. Okay, they can dictate the future versions. Now, Elastic.co is a copyright holder for Elasticsearch, although it is significantly based on Apache Lucene. So again, Apache Lucene is a open source software. Elasticsearch was also an open source software, Apache 2, that Elastic.co used, but Elastic.co was the governance body. So it decided how to use that. And there's an interesting story I will talk about in the end, what happened, what is happening now in the market. Okay, so the next item is brand. So like, who owns the brand or the logo? So the brand is the logo that goes along with the software. Okay, you might have seen this brand for Cassandra, Kafka, Spark. Now, it is not very critical, okay, to make decisions to make decision to which software to use, but it surely confuses everyone. It confuses me for sure. It goes hand in hand with governance. So the three logos on the top are owned by Apache Foundation, a nonprofit entity. On the other hand, the logos for Mariadb and Scala are owned by corporations. It's a profit-making company. Even though they are open source software, okay, they are owned by a profit-making company. So these are dynamics we should be careful about. Now, another interesting example is the logo for open source Drupal is owned by an individual. Okay, Dries Buytaert, I don't know how to pronounce the name. He owns that logo as BDFL, Benevolent Dictator for Life. Okay, so an individual is owning an open source logo, but the governance is nonprofit. So again, I will talk about that in the future as few examples to clarify things. But these are some of the intricacies that you should know, like who owns the license, who manages, who does the governance, and who owns the brand. They're all interrelated things, and they present lots of dynamics that we should be aware of. Okay, next is business model. So now we know something about licensing, branding, and governance. But what type of business models that exist in the open source domain? All right. So the first model, which probably is not a business model, is pure open source. In this case, the community and the key corporations working in the project with no financial incentives. For example, Apple and Netflix invest heavily in Cassandra open source project with the sole purpose of enhancing the project to benefit their use cases. So it's a pure open source model. Okay, the companies are willingly contributing, communities are willingly contributing to the project to benefit the community as well as their own individual use cases. The next model is the open core business model. Now, these vendors generally want to keep the core strong, okay, because that attracts that enables the adoption. But they have a big interest in protecting the value in their proprietary extension. For example, DataStax for Cassandra or Confluent for Kafka. The next model is open source IP owner. Now, these vendors may have open source license and the code may be completely transparent, but as they own the IP, the open source mantle is used only as marketing. Most of the committers of the projects are also in most cases, from the vendor owning the IP. Examples is Elastic.co and Scala. The last model is by cloud providers. They focus mostly on operations and delivery of the product with minimal investment in the community. And again, it's changing, but I'm just giving a general statement. They try to reap benefits of the open source with their ability to scale and their reliability. Elastic.co recently changed its licensing to compete with AWS hosting solutions. As I discussed already, I'm going to discuss this use case a little bit in more detail to give you some perspective. So these are some of the white papers. I'm going to share this slide deck with all of you. So you will have access to these white papers. There are more details. As I said, And there are several nuances. It is difficult to cover everything. And if I try to draw a matrix, but it's really difficult to cover all the aspects. But anyway, some of the white papers clarify a few things for individual products. And you can take a look at those. All right, so another key item we must consider while evaluating open source is ecosystem. So many open source projects have related components that are not integrated with the original project, but are very complementary. So along with these related components, the ecosystem also refers to community, other resources, long-term perspective for these projects. So ecosystem covers like complementary products, the community, available resources, and kind of a long-term perspective, okay, based on who is part of the community. And I will discuss a little bit more on next few slides. So the ecosystem is healthy if many large corporations are contributors to the open source projects. They can provide assurance of future stability. For example, Apple and Netflix are major contributors of Cassandra. So if you're using Cassandra, Cassandra is not going anywhere and is always going to be enhanced in terms of features, because Apple and Netflix have vested interest, and there's a huge community behind that. So I think it's a fairly stable product. Another item is available ecosystem of consultants and people providing integrated solution also provides stability. So if there's a number of consultants, number of different solutions, number of people that are available using that open source solution, then again, the ecosystem is very healthy and the product is going to continue. So many times, a key software is identified together with related open source components. Now, this can also provide stability. So let me give you an example on the next page. Okay, as you can see from the table, on the left-hand side, we have Confluent Kafka, all the features that it provides. And on the right-hand side, I have open source alternatives. So, if you notice, for each of the proprietary features, there is equivalent alternative, open source alternative available. For example, for replication and mirroring, we have Mirror Maker 2. There are several open source connectors are available. For monitoring and alerting, we can use Prometheus. So for every proprietary component of a Confluent Kafka, there is an equivalent open source alternative available. So that also makes the use of the open source and the ecosystem very strong. All right. So now that we have looked at some of the those 4 or 5 considerations, let's take a recent development in the open source market regarding Elasticsearch. Okay, so this is a good story and kind of highlights some of the complexities and the dynamics that are happening in the market. So Elasticsearch began using Apache 2.0 license, and it was governed by Elastic.co. And Elastic.co experimented with mixed tree licensing. They call it XPack. The governance and the decisions were made by Elastic.co. It was a commercial company. So it's an open source license, but a commercial company is governing it. So see the dynamics. Elastic.co made money by providing hosting services plus proprietary add-ons. Now, AWS started offering similar hosting services for Elasticsearch, kind of undercutting Elastic.co. Elastic.co changed their licensing model from Apache 2.0 to Elastic Licensing and SSPL, server-side public license. So basically, AWS could no longer use Elasticsearch in its current form going forward. Well, AWS did not take it lightly, and they, on the other hand, forked the then version of Elasticsearch along with Netflix, and they have their own open search version of Elasticsearch. So we have like 2 versions now. So when you decide which version to take, okay, keep this in mind. Which is 100% open source, which is owned by a commercial company. What are some of the ecosystems behind it? What are some of the licensing complexities? But this is a really good case, which just happened like a few months ago, where the dynamics of licensing, business model, ecosystem played a big role. All right, so this part was supposed to be interactive, but I think I think I'll just go like that, okay? Because we are virtual, okay? But I wanted to run through some popular open source software and see who owns the license and who owns the governance. Say Cassandra, okay? So I think most people probably know, at least those who are in the open source community. The license is Apache 2.2, and the governance is nonprofit Apache Foundation. Okay, next, if you use DataStax Cassandra, okay, the licensing is Apache 2.0 for core, plus they have their proprietary features, which are licensed under DataStax. The governance is completely commercial, is by DataStax. Kafka, same as Cassandra, Apache 2.2 and nonprofit Apache Foundation. Confluent Kafka, similar to DataStax, 2.0 for core and proprietary for their features. And again, the governance is commercial. Next one is interesting, Mariadb. Okay, this is GPL v2, which is open source license, but it is owned by Mariadb Corporation, and the governance is also it's commercial. It's not open source. Scylla, again, the license is open source, owned by Scylla Corporation, and the governance is completely commercial. So it's not open source. Drupal, this is a very interesting software that I like, where the license is open source. It is owned by an individual. Okay, they use the term BDFL, benevolent dictator for life, and the governance is still nonprofit Drupal association. So as you see in the short, and there are many examples, and I wanted to have this interactive game, but I think on this virtual things we can do only few limited things. But this will give you an idea as to what are the dynamics of this licensing and governance, some of the things that are open source but are still governed by commercial interests. So you have to be very careful when you're using open source software. Is it true open source or not? All right. So now that you have kind of understood what open source is, what open core is, what are some of the dynamics with using licensing and governance and ecosystem and branding and things like that, I want to talk about my company, InstaCluster, which is 100% open source company. Okay, there's no licensing fee, no lock-in. We support only 100% software. So there are two things going on currently, or maybe for the last 5-10 years. One is big data. Okay, we are creating lots of data. I think the Facebook and Twitter and everywhere we are creating data, IoT. And the second big thing that is going on is artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning and things like that. And both either create data or are dependent on data. So data is playing a critical role now in every enterprise. And there are three ways to address, to provide data solutions. One is pure open source. Third is using open core. And second is open core, and third is proprietary. InstaCluster is focused on providing data solution using only open source technologies. All right, so how do we deliver? So on the bottom, okay, we have the technologies that we support: Cassandra, Kafka, Elasticsearch, Redis, and Spark. And on the top row, we have our offerings, okay, consulting, support, and managed service. Consulting is pretty self-explanatory. Support is like when your Kafka cluster goes down and you need some help, okay, you can call us and we'll help you. If the Apache Kafka, the open source version, has a bug, okay, the community, it takes time for community to fix the bug. But we can fix that bug for you if you have signed up support with us, and we'll work with the community to include that bug in the future versions. So, but until that time, we'll support your patched version. So that's support. Managed platform. Well, if you're a financial company, if you're an insurance company, if you're a manufacturing company, and you don't want to focus on managing Cassandra and Kafka, you can come to us, and we can manage those clusters for you on your premise or on any of the clouds, AWS, Google Cloud, or Azure. And in the middle, okay, what we have is our differentiating factors. Okay, so first, we provide full life cycle, right from strategy to architecture to development to implementation to training to support, and if you require, managed platform. then we are 100% open source. There's no licensing, no lock-in. We only support open source technologies. Operations first. Even though we have not written software, we don't write code for Cassandra, Kafka, Elasticsearch, okay? We have the most experience in operating it. Next is certified, we provide certified and tested builds. And then we continuously contribute back to the community, okay, by filling gaps, fixing bugs. We continuously, and those are some of the differentiating factors that that divide us with the other companies. So let me give an example here. So on the screen, okay, there's a company who is using several technologies, open core proprietary technologies. Okay, they have Cassandra from DataStax, Mongo from MongoDB from Mongo, Kafka from Confluent, Redis from Redis Lab, and things like that. As you can see, they are using multiple licenses. They are using a lot of proprietary software, and there is possible vendor and technology lock-in. Compare that to the right-hand side, where a company can use all the similar software, but they are all open source. There is no licensing fee and there is no vendor lock-in. So that's kind of the two examples where on one side you're dealing with multiple licenses and vendor lock-in and proprietary software. On the other hand, there is no licensing, zero licensing fees, and there is no technology or vendor lock-in. So this is a brief kind of a platform overview. I think I have covered this mostly, so I'll just go briefly. On the top, we have the technology that we support. We saw that already. On the bottom, there are all the clouds we support: AWS, Heroku, Azure, Google Cloud Platform, and also on-prem. And in the middle, we have the services that we provide. So for all these technologies, we can help with provisioning, monitoring, scaling, security, backup, restore, all the feature solution that you require to successfully manage and run these software. We provide that. Our company was founded in 2013. We have around 130 employees now, headquartered in Redwood City. We have over 300 customers. A lot of big brand names: FedEx and IBM and Kohl's and DoorDash. Okay, so in conclusion, so if you want to use open source technology, okay, you can use open source technology if you want to continue using true open source software and not move towards proprietary. So if you want to, so stick to open source if you don't want to use proprietary software. If you don't want to pay software licensing cost, if you want to avoid vendor locking, avoid technology locking, want to be part of the open source community, and most importantly, you want to innovate your solution and not be dependent on third-party proprietary vendor for your solution. So for this conference, okay, there is a special promotion. So if you want to take benefit of this, you can connect with us. We can provide you 2-hour open source consulting advice, plus 1 week free access to InstaCluster platform, where you can spin up 3-node clusters in like 3 to 5 minutes: Cassandra cluster, Kafka cluster, Elasticsearch cluster, Redis, and you can enjoy for a week our platform. Just mention Data Summit Connect to get these above promotions. And I think with that, that's the end of my talk. So thank you so much. Please connect with me directly if you have any questions. There is still some time, so I don't know if there are any questions already there.
Okay. Oh, hi, Anil. Thank you again for a very informative session. And I've been looking through the chat. There aren't any questions as of yet, but it could be people want to connect with you directly in the networking.
Sure.
So just a reminder, people, that after the session, head on over to networking, and you can share and engage with Anil there. Anil, perhaps maybe if you want to open up your slide there for people to, in case if there unable to connect with you through networking, they could connect you through email. I think your last slide had your email address.
Yes, yes, yeah, definitely. Let me share that again. Okay.
And I'll actually post it in the chat as well.
Okay. So this is my email, and also you can go to instacluster.com. You can send an email directly to me or to info. If you go to instacluster.com, there will be several other other items that you will like. But any questions, contact me directly, or go to our website and find out if that answers your questions.
Awesome. Thank you. I know I did put your email in the chat for those that can just grab it there as well.
Perfect.
But again, I know we'll be over in the networking session. So if you were too shy to post the questions here, find Anil over the networking and continue those conversations there.